Okay, we start in the last session of the day, which has been very intense. We went from origin of life to artificial origin of life to mathematical models of consciousness to computer science and computers that become conscious. So previous session, consciousness of the human-centric. We saw a lot of pictures of babies and humans and so on. But if we are looking for what is consciousness and what is intelligence, we need to look at things that are not human. So our next talk is Tamar Gutnick, who's coming from the Vienna Zoo. She's working lots of interesting places and always looking at the intelligence of something and someone that was mentioned before, Octopus. So Tamar Gutnick, yeah.
Figure this. This is Doria. I'm not going to go into the specifics, but basically Doria is playing with a piece of Lego. She knows it's not food. She knows it won't get her food. It won't get her anything. But she keeps pushing it and pulling it and letting it go and taking it over again and letting it go. And scientifically, that's called play-like behavior. And play is considered one of the hallmarks of intelligence. Every organism is capable of responding to a stimulus. But the question is, how do we look for intelligence or consciousness or even the more simpler, complex cognition in animals that do not speak? And I think what is very clear from the talks before me is the first problem is that there is no consensus what any of those terms mean. So there's no single definition that I can give to what complex cognition is. So I'm going to make up one. For the purpose of having to test an animal, I need to have some sort of idea of what I'm looking for. So I'm just going to call it the ability to collect information from the past, from the present, even to contemplate the future, to manipulate this information in some way and come up with a voluntary action. Now, one of the problems that we see is that when we look at this, we take a very human view to it. Humans have been fascinated by octopuses for thousands of years. And apart from seeing them as food, because they look so different and they live in an alien land, they've also been seen as monsters. And this has continued into pop culture. I don't know if you know Doctor Who. But as we brought octopuses out of the sea and put them into aquariums, then we began to recognize something else, and that is intelligence. Once we could observe their behavior, we saw that they're actually responding in ways that we think are intelligent. And then popular media came around, because when they got popular, the popular media obscured the scientific evidence. And we start assigning octopuses ideas that are human. We assign them motivations that are human. And in a way, with all of these, we've created mythical creatures. Now, if you look at this guy, the scientifically named Wonderpus photogenicus is one of about 300 species of octopuses. And it really is, when he looks back at you, it is easy to try and think what is going on in his mind. So what do we know scientifically? We have scientific evidence of problem solving. We have scientific evidence of play-like behavior. We have scientific evidence of navigation abilities. And so there are scientific studies, but actually a lot of what we know is just anecdotal. We keep these animals in the lab, And we see that they recognize individuals. They are different from each other. They have opinions about different people that they interact with. They will learn to spit through a crack in the tank directly at your face. And so all of these anecdotes give us an impression of an animal that is intelligent. But they're not the only intelligent animals coming from this environment. So I think nobody will disagree that these three animals here, if I could point at them, are intelligent. So orcas, mammals, of course they're smart. Reptiles, turtles, navigation abilities, and other capabilities of learning. And of course, we know by now that fish can be extremely smart. These guys have their brains that are organized in a single sort of line. They share a fundamental architecture. They have forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain, and different areas, for instance, will be related to different functions, but the fundamental architecture is the same. Then we have the octopus. We know that the basic components are the same. They have neurons, they have synapses, they have electrochemical conduction, but the architecture is completely foreign and we do not understand it yet. So where did they actually come from? Not from outer space. The idea is that these animals evolved at the same time as pony fish and in competition with them. So it was a transition from animals that are armored and move slowly into animals that are no longer armored and move fast. They lost their external shell, which resulted in an increase in mobility. They developed a fully predatory lifestyle, meaning that they're generalist predator. That means anything is possibly food. You want to investigate something because you potentially can eat it. They developed new defense mechanisms. The most spectacular of them is this camouflage system. It's neuronally controlled, and all of those colors are basically little sacs of pigments that are controlled by neurons. They have a short lifespan. Depending on the species, around 2 years with no generational overlap. And this is increase in intelligence. So we have an increase in mobility, an increase in sensory input, an increase in intelligence. And to underlie that, we have an increase in brain size. So they're mollusks. They're related to limpets. Limpets are fairly sessile. They have in the thousands of neurons, and they're distributed with very few ganglions. The more mobile aplysia has already more ganglions and tens of thousands of neurons. And then you have octopus with 500 million neurons. And this ganglion idea or ganglion build still happens here. You have an esophagus going through the middle of this lobulized system with tightly packed small cells, interconnected, potentially lobes that are involved with specific functions, and basically it's a brain. But actually, over 60% of these 500 million neurons are not in the brain. They're in the body and arms. Now, 60% seems a lot. That leaves us with only 170 million. That's still more than you find in the brain of a mouse. So what is happening outside the brain? The anatomy of the octopus arm. So the octopus arm is a multi-tool. They use it for walking, for hand, leg, tongue. And basically, it's a muscular isoset. It has no skeleton. It has to create force by using opposing muscles. It means also it's completely flexible. It can move in any direction. Each one of these arms has about 200 of individually movable suckers. Each one of these suckers contains tens of thousands of primary sensory cells. And these cells are mechanoreceptors for touch and taste, chemoreceptors for smell. You get the gist. And then photoreceptors for light detection. How is this organized? It's an extremely distributed nervous system. So these primary sensory cells go into ganglions right above each sucker and an extra ganglion right in the central nerve cord of the arm. These are actually connected and share information between suckers. When one sucker touches something, the two neighboring suckers are going to come and touch that too. This information is also shared between arms without going to the central nervous system. There are direct tracks that go between the arms, and when one arm touches something, the two neighboring arms are going to come and grab it too. And actually, when you isolate an arm from an animal, then it will continue to move in a very coordinated fashion, and it would also respond to certain types of stimuli. It's not surprising that with an appendage that can do so many things, this is a great inspiration for soft robotics. There are many projects in many different labs working to recreate various aspects of octopus arms and octopus suckers, and also octopus skin, being able to create 3D morphing texture. What is interesting is that when you think of all of these abilities, these are done by these abilities, the suction, the reaching, it's done by a distributed nervous system, and the central control is only a general guidance. So these can be organized without a central nervous system. So go back to the question, are they really that intelligent? We have to move from anecdotes, and we have to move to be able to measure something scientifically. And we approach this we use three different approaches to this question. The first is, how do octopuses see the world? We're visual animals, and we talk about how we see the world. If I was talking about a bat, it would be, how do they hear the world? If it's the dog, it's how does he validate by smell everything that he just saw? When we talk about an octopus, you can see they react to visual stimuli. But there is a whole other there's a whole other sensory world going on over here that we do not know yet. So how do we approach this? The question is not what does the sensor sense, but whether this information can actually be used to create some sort of representation of the information in the brain and to make a decision. Now, octopuses are very hard to work with. They like to destroy everything you put in, and you can't force them to do something with their body that they're not interested in. And that means that we have to train them to voluntarily participate in this experiment and teach them to put their arms into mazes and make a decision on where to put the arm in order to get a food reward that they can then pull out of the maze and eat. So how do we do this? This is just one version of the experiment. You have the animal that puts an arm into the central stem. The arm can either go on one tube or the other tube. At the end of the tubes, there's a gold box where food is present. We use food to ensure that the central nervous system is involved in the process because the reward is central. You have to consume the food in order for it to be a reward. We can control for visual stimuli. We just make this side of the maze opaque. The animal can't see what its arm is doing inside. And we put food in both sides so that the animal can't follow a chemical trail. So in a version in which we want animals to learn tactile information, we put a stimulus, texture on one of the sides. The animal has to put his arm in, feel whether there is the correct texture. If there is the correct texture, he goes all the way to the end, gets his food. If there isn't the correct texture, he has to change what the arm is doing and make another decision. There we go. Okay, well, that's a video. I'm not going to recreate that. Basically, we have we can see that there is an online exchange of information. The animal is getting information from an arm inside the maze. Only this arm is giving him information that he needs to pay attention to. And then based on the information that that arm has gained, he has to decide how to continue moving with that arm. And if you think about the way that the nervous system is organized, that's not such a straightforward task. What is very important and reinforces that this is essential is that once the animal has learned it, it can do it with any of the arms. The second approach is it's time to actually quantify complex behaviors. So years of research have developed a battery of tests for different aspects of complex cognition, and these need to be applied to octopus. That means that we're looking at things like self-awareness in mirror studies, categorization, navigation, and also now we're looking at social interactions. The final approach, and what is important, is to correlate electrical activity of the brain to behavior. And this is also something that was touched on before. So in humans, we have fMRI, EEG, all kinds of non-invasive methods together with actual clinical information. And we sort of mapped out what different areas of the brain do. In animals, the state of the art is directly recording neural activity. And the way this is done is by fixing the equipment to the head of the animal and dental cementing it to the skull. Octopuses have no skull. Then you tether it to your recording equipment. Octopuses have 8 arms that really quickly remove anything sticking outside their skin. And then you let the animal behave. Another advance on this tethering has been telemetry. So being able, instead of having wires, to transmit via Bluetooth the information that's being recorded. Unfortunately, octopuses live in salt water. So, but there has been technological advances that have made this possible, and that is miniaturization. And these loggers basically mean that you can take a logger, connect it to a pigeon, release the pigeon in one country, pick it up in a different country, plug in the thing, and download what has been going on in the brain of the pigeon while it was gone. So we developed a method to use this in octopus. And what we do is we found a way of implanting the logger inside the octopus in a way that it seems that he does not sense that it is there. So this is an octopus that is implanted and is sitting happily inside his very tight house. And what we can get is implanting electrodes into the brain and then having a synchronized video recordings of behavior together with electrical recordings of the brain and motion signals from the location of the log. Now, we are just starting this, and what we see is that basically we can record the activity from the animal, and now we're basically poised to start actually looking what is happening inside the black box. One of the things that we did see is that we're finding oscillation activity, and oscillations is something that is important in other animals and is relevant to brain states, and perhaps that is something that would be relevant in intelligence. So my conclusion basically is that it is much harder to ask someone who cannot speak what he's thinking. And octopuses are a great example for the fact that intelligence is not based on architecture or a brain. It is something that emerges. And it probably emerges as a solution to life. So these projects have been in collaboration with many people, especially my partner in crime, Michael Kuba. And as a last slide, I've asked AI to draw a diagram of the nervous system of two intelligent invertebrates. They both have cortexes here. Thank you.